Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast this week. Today I have a very lovely guest with me, Stephen Webster. He is a senior advisor here at Infused Innovations. He specializes in partner and consulting services, and we're going to actually break this episode into two parts, part one and part two, because it is just so good and packed and loaded with information. So stay tuned for part two next week, but for now, let's hop into it. So nice to have you on the podcast with us again. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Melissa. Thank you so very much for having me on today's podcast. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Well, awesome. Happy to have you. And today we discussed that we're going to talk about something that is very relevant called the Great Resignation. And we're also going to get into tools and resources that have been helpful for successful businesses in keeping their teams happy and engaged and well around. So there's a lot to cover here. So we're just going to go ahead and dive in if that's okay with you.
That's okay with me, Melissa. Let's do it.
All right. So lately there's been a lot of coverage on what we said, the Great Resignation. And during COVID, a lot of employees were reassessing their relationship with their employers. So can you talk to me about what's happening and how this is impacting businesses?
It's really amazing what's going on right now, Melissa. It's something that we have never seen before, really, in the employment here in the U.S. and globally, not just here in the U.S. When you look at the U.S. Department of Labor, during the April through June 2021 period, 11.5 million workers actually quit their jobs.
Wow.
So you're seeing that this incredible pattern of people who have had a chance to really think through what happened during COVID. They're working from home, their relationship with their employers, their ability to do things differently than they've done them before. And people are just looking to do new things now. There's a lot of information out there about side gigs and entrepreneurial initiatives. And I think a lot of folks just realized that they were pretty miserable doing what they were doing, and they're reconsidering their lives and what they're doing about them. A recent survey by Microsoft of about 30,000 workers found that like 41% of workers in the workplace, Melissa, are considering quitting their jobs.
Wow.
Which, as you could imagine, right? And that's going to spread itself across different generations as well. If you look at Gen Z as an example, that 41% number is 54%. So you just have a lot of folks who are just thinking about what should they be doing with their lives? Where do they want to focus their attention? Where do they want to be creating value? And of course, do they have a fair value exchange with their employer? Is the employer getting from them what they need? And of course, is the employee getting from the employer what they need?
I really like that you bring that up. Now, today, more than ever, employees are also demanding what you call that fair exchange, right? Like they want to make sure that they have flexible hours. Maybe some people want to be able to work from home. They want to make sure that they're getting compensated fairly for their time. I know particularly in the younger generations and groups that are starting to work now, there's this sensational idea of being able to travel and work and have that flexible lifestyle. So with that being said, what are the core issues that you're seeing that are driving this resignation? Is it similar to what I'm saying? Are we seeing differences in different age groups? What are executives lacking that's driving employees away?
Yeah, it's very, very similar, Melissa, and you framed it up quite nicely. I was actually just reading a LinkedIn survey the other day as well, where 74% of employees said that the time that they spent at home, either during the shutdown or working remotely, really caused them to rethink their work situation. But what you're seeing is that over half of those employees cited stress and burnout in their current position as a reason to look elsewhere. You have some companies, right, who handled the COVID transition to a hybrid workforce or a completely at-home workforce very well. Many companies, however, did not handle that well, Melissa. So
Right.
Other points of dissatisfaction and even fear that has been created by these employers, caused by knee-jerk cost-cutting reactions, terminations, they clearly weren't prepared for it. So I think that what we saw during COVID was a lot of businesses who were just not ready to handle such a situation, and they were exposed as to just how bad their leadership might be or how weak their leadership was in a time of crisis. So
Right.
I think what people really looked for, and what people are always looking for, and a lot of our conversation today will be about the need for great leadership and how leadership needs to change and evolve from what it's been before. Lots of times what you hear is that 63% of people consider leaving, Melissa, because they don't have a good manager or they have a toxic manager. That's really a key driver, right? As to why do people stay in their job? They stay in their job because if they have a great leader and a great manager, someone who respects them, someone who admires them, someone who trusts them, someone who is training them, someone who is giving them an increased responsibility, all of those things create value for the employee. And for managers who are not able to do that, either because they haven't been trained to be a good manager or they were put into the position because they were the best available athlete for the role, the fact of the matter is that impacts all of the people that work there. And also it impacts all of the people who work in the rest of the organization, because what happens is you hear, oh, that's not a good manager, or that's a great manager, you want to work for him, or that's a bad manager, you never want to work for them, right? The scuttlebutt gets around, employees talk. So all of this stuff gets exposed one way or the other. And a lot of this has been really exposed in a much greater light during the COVID crisis from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, two parts to that. It reminds me of, that telephone line game that we played when we were kids. Do you remember how it was like one person said something and then it gets said to another person and to another person, and then all of a sudden at the end of the line, after one message is communicated to so many different people, you've got this totally different thing. So even if you're, saying something offensive, or maybe you're not that upset about your boss or your employer or whatever, but you say this tiny thing, it could easily get manipulated or misconstrued to the entire team. What you said really resonated with me, because we have great leadership here at Infused Innovations, and I'm always telling them that and trying to make sure that they know how grateful I am of that, that they're so flexible with the things that we love and we want to do and that we enjoy doing. And I think that's really important. There's a lot of room for growth, and there's a lot of openness, and what do you enjoy doing, and how is this person going to be a better asset?
Yes, I mean, here at Infused, we are blessed with that great leadership who is highly responsive. They're highly self-aware. They listen to the employees. And that's, I think, a critical component to any company's success moving forward, is to make sure that dialogue is a two-way dialogue. Employees have many of the answers to the questions and the challenges for all employers. It's just a matter of making sure that the transparency and the lines of communication are open. And if you have a trusting relationship with all of your employees where people feel that they're safe to say something, right, which is a whole other organization. You as an employee should always feel safe to say there's not going to be any repercussions by bringing something up that might not be a popular topic, or might be a little bit counter to the way everybody is thinking. What it is it's a point of view, and it's a point of view that requires healthy discussion and healthy debate, because normally you're not the only person who's thinking that. There are other people thinking it. It's just a matter of, who's the person who's going to stand up and say something, and then is leadership ready to engage in that conversation? And it is those thoughtful discussions that create a better, healthier, higher camaraderie, greater teamwork, all of the things that really propel organizations like Infused to great success.
Correct. Yeah. So getting back to this idea that a lot of employees have left their organizations, there are a lot of businesses that are hiring right now, and hiring an alignment of resources to achieve those business goals. They're huge for success for businesses. So during this transition, how has all of this been altered to a hybrid work environment? Give us some context behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the concept of always having the right person in the right seat in the role has always been critically important to all companies' success, even more so now, though, essential, right? Because in the today's state, if I was having a conversation with a friend this morning, and I've been a manager many times in my life in the old world where everybody went to the office. And one of my primary ways of managing was managing by walking around, right? I would go and chat with everybody in the organization, whether that was my 50-person organization or a 100-person organization. I was constantly out there listening, learning, hearing, making sure that I was well, it's difficult for a manager today to do management by walking around if
Right.
not all the offices, not all your employees are there.
Now
So
there's a sense of permission. So there has to be an organized meeting or an organized communication, or even if you're just messaging back and forth, that communication is very thoughtful as opposed to free flowing.
that's correct. Yes, it's much more of a purposeful conversation today, where it used to be it could be a casual conversation that could create a purposeful conversation. Today, it's a matter from a manager's perspective. How do you create those purposeful conversations, or a meaningful interaction with people every single time that you engage with them? Your question was really centered around the hiring aspect of it, and the question now becomes is when you're hiring, you kind of hire for your skill and you hire for the experience to do the job. But a lot of what you now need to hire is for what's really in the person's mind. What is their behavior? What is their cognitive abilities to change, to move quickly, to transform? So it's really a matter of making sure that you're finding employees that you could have great, trusting, and transparent relationships with, so that they can excel in their role, and you as a leader can lead them in either a hybrid or a work in the office or a completely remote situation. I think all of that stuff is here to stay, Melissa. I don't see us ever going back to exactly the way it was before. I think what COVID did was it forced the social experiment of, can people work from home? And it's now proven to many people that yes, people can work from home and people can be very productive from home.
And that they enjoy it.
And that they enjoy it. Now, there are parts of work, of course, that we miss, right? And I know you fairly well, and we're both kind of social creatures. So we would enjoy being in an office around a lot of people because we're more extroverted, right, from a personality perspective. Many folks that we work with on the technology side, they're more reflective, they're more introverted. So those folks kind of have their own nuclear power plants, Melissa. They don't need anyone else to generate their energy during the day.
I love that.
you and I, generally speaking, would plug into people when we would go to the office, and we would get a lot of our energy from the people around us. For me, that was actually something that I really needed to train myself on in the last 18 months, was being able to generate my own energy in a world where I'm unable to plug into people from a live perspective. But that hiring process, you mentioned, it's a good point. Right? Everybody is hiring. So many people are hiring, looking for the right talent. This is an enormous opportunity to upgrade your staff and find the right people to really go on that journey with you as an employer, and offer them things that in the past, right, having a pool table or having free snacks or having beers at 5 o'clock, those were part of the benefits that you were getting to go work in those organizations. Well, those things don't matter anymore, right? The question now becomes is, what does the employer offer from a training perspective, from a development perspective, from a growth perspective? How do you, from an engagement perspective, how do you keep providing value to that employee, so that employee says, my goodness gracious, I'm going to do everything I can to work for this employer because they're taking care of me, not giving me snacks or not giving me little treats or doing this or doing that. Those things were nice to have. This is really about developing people as great leaders or as great employees, and that more of that responsibility now falls to the employer.
Yeah, and I think that just means they're doing the real work, the hard work, as opposed to just trying to keep employees happy on the surface level.
That's right.
I want to go back and ask you a question about something that you had mentioned, is wanting to hire those employees who are quality employees, and they're flexible and they are adaptable and all of those things. But how can you measure that when you're hiring? If you had any advice, how could you measure that?
Well, there are a number of tools that are out there, Melissa, that help you just get to know a person much differently than you might get to know them just during the interview or just from reading their resume, right? The one that I always talk about, and I know that you're familiar with, would be the Predictive Index. The Predictive Index is a complete software as a service platform that enables the leaders of an organization to not only get to know you, the one, but know you within then the context of the team that you would be in, and then know you within the context of the team and the strategy for the organization. So platforms like the Predictive Index are there to create a more objective view of human resources so that you're not saying, we're not leaving an interview, Melissa, saying, hey, did you like Joe? Yeah, I liked Joe a lot. Did you like him? Yeah, I liked him. All right, let's hire him. Well, okay, it's good to like Joe.
Right. That's an important part. You got to like him.
You got to like him. Yeah, I completely agree with that. But at the end of the day, there's more to it than that. It's how will they fit? How will they complement the team? So much of what we see, for example, on our team here at Infused Innovations is a tremendous amount of, I'll refer to it as behavioral diversity, right? We've had a chance to provide everyone with the Predictive Index, and they've all taken the behavioral assessment. And we actually have a very broad reaching group of people here on our team where there's only one or two folks on the entire organization who kind of have the same behavioral profile. Everyone brings their own personal behavioral profile there, and it gives us the opportunity to, again, get to know everybody and also to build those more trusting relationships. We always hear about diversity all the time, but having behavioral diversity is as important as having ethnic diversity or gender diversity in your organizations. It all falls under that remarkable umbrella, right? Where more diversity means you're going to likely be able to do a better job because you're going to have more opinions and more perspectives than things that people who would be very similar in their thinking would get to.
And different habits. I think that's so important, right? Like if we're working, a huge part of that is making sure that we have the ability to get things done, or that we at least have teammates that we're working with that can help bring that out of us. You know what I mean? You talked about the different profiles and stuff. And to give everyone context, we had a team meeting with Infused Innovations where Stephen had, you had gotten up and chatted about everyone's different profiles. And I had so much fun learning about the different profiles, the different characteristics that came with, and then learning how my profile would interact, with this profile and vice versa. It was so much fun. So can you tell us about some of the different profiles, like the main profiles, and maybe some of the characteristics for them?
Absolutely, Melissa. There are, in the Predictive Index, there are 17 sort of behavioral profiles that they have framed. They've had the opportunity to do this work for 65 or some odd years, right? So they've got 45 million examples of this particular questionnaire that they're able to draw conclusions from and leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that to help really identify who we are. And we're all at our DNA. We all have our own approach to things. That's who we are. There's a nature and nurture discussion there, right? That we could have probably for an entire other podcast around this, Melissa. But what the intent here is to begin to really understand yourself from a self-awareness perspective. So I had the privilege, right, of spending time with you on your behavioral profile. And you are a persuader, and that's one of the 17 monikers. And a persuader is a risk-taking, socially poised, and motivating team builder. And in my time getting to know you, that's exactly who you are. And when I walked you through the behavioral assessment, would you say that the results of that behavioral assessment were reflective of who the Melissa is that you know?
Oh, I was shocked. I mean, how many questions? It was not very long. And I remember
5 minutes, right? Maybe to.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, there's no way this is really going to break down all that much. And when I got my assessment back, I was like, what? I mean, just the technology behind how they figure out your profile is so incredible. But yeah, I would agree.
It's an amazing tool, right? And for me, I happen to be a maverick, and a maverick is referred to as someone who's an outside the box thinker who has no fear of failure. So that's my bumper sticker on that. And if I read through my profile, right, it's like, oh my God, how on earth could they know this much about me? But when all is said and done, what all of this leads to is the ability to be more self-aware around who you are. And lots of times, as you know, we get into certain situations and we get frustrated or we get highly stressed by it. But if you can understand why you're stressed by it, you can then control that stress. You say, okay, I understand why I'm stressed by this because of these conditions. So it's not a right or wrong, right? The term that I use with you, Melissa, and with everybody is you are perfect as you are, and I am perfect as I am, and everybody is perfect as they are. But being aware and being self-aware of those things then lets you essentially move that into the organization and become more self-aware of your coworkers. Mm-hmm. So that now what this is all about, right, is building great teams. So the tools inside of the Predictive Index also give you the ability to see the team in a more holistic view. You referenced that earlier where I was able to basically do this entire work for the entire Infused team, and we can see what categories we fall into and which ones we don't. It's all really about being able to build, Melissa, a more transparent and trusting relationship where you could look at me and say, I know why you're acting that way, Stephen. It's because this is what your profile is. And it just takes that risk out of the dialogue, and it helps to just improve that communication. You know, great organizations who use tools like this, and I've had the privilege of being to the Predictive Index offices. They actually have their personality profiles outside of their cubicles or outside of their walls or actually behind them on their Zoom, right? So that when you are dealing with that person, you're able to basically understand what would be the better way for you to deal with that person. If they're similar to you, there's different approaches that you could take. And if they're different than you, there's different approaches that you can take. For you and I, we're two chatty people, Melissa, as we know, right? When we're dealing with someone who's more introverted, it's important for us to pause. It's important for us to listen. It's important for us to speak. Yes, and let them speak, right? Like for you and I, when we have a conversation, it's like I'm speaking fast and you're speaking fast and I'm speaking fast and you're speaking fast. But for someone who
of communication,
it's just a highway. It's called the super highway of communication. But for other people who are different than you and I, it's important for us to pause. And that has been a giant learning experience for me in my career, is to make sure that I'm not dominating a conversation. I'm not just talking at, I'm listening to. So just raising those levels of self-awareness are, help to make a better person in the spirit of trying to continuously improve. But more importantly, help to break down those barriers of communication and transparency with your coworkers.
Yeah, have you heard of the book? I'm sure you have, the 5 Love Languages.
The 5 Love Languages. Yes, I have.
I mean, this is essentially the work version of that. People have read that book and felt like their relationship totally changed because they were able to understand their partner, and things that would bother them before they now understand and have learned how to adapt to that communication or that love language. And they just kind of, understand that person a little bit more. I feel like that is exactly what this is, but this is just the work version of that.
I would completely agree with that, Melissa. The important thing, and what you mentioned there, the important thing is to read it and learn about it and hear about it, but most importantly, to implement it and to make it a habit and to be reflective on that, right? Because change is hard. Change is hard for many people. You just want to continue to be the way you've always been. But when you have the love language book or you have the Predictive Index, it's really about taking what you learn there and then applying it to those relationships and applying it to your life. You can transform any of these things. You can make them much more positive. It's just a matter of taking the responsibility and doing it.
So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this part 1 of the podcast here with Stephen Webster. This is such a great conversation, and if you're really loving it, I hope that you tune in next week for part 2, and we will see you next time.